If you have ever experienced a moment when someone looked at you with judgmental eyes, just because of your appearance, you will understand the feeling this story brings. If you have ever kept silent in the face of injustice because you did not want to cause trouble, or because you have been used to suffering since childhood, then today's story may touch a layer of memory that you always wanted to forget. Before we begin, if you believe that respect is a value that everyone deserves, please like, share, subscribe to the channel so we can spread stories about perseverance, kindness, and the journey to overcome prejudice. Now then, here we go. That morning, Denver International Airport was bustling as usual. The sound of suitcases rolling on the floor, the loudspeaker announcements, the smell of freshly roasted coffee in the corner of the hallway, all created a very real scene very familiar to those who often travel by plane. In the crowded crowd, Naomi Carter, a black woman in her late 40s, walked calmly. She wore a light gray cardigan, simple linen pants, and carried a worn canvas backpack. No diamond watch, no designer bag, no bodyguard. At first glance, Naomi could only be thought of as a university lecturer or a mother on her way to the East Coast to visit her child. No one knew that the woman was one of the most powerful black CEOs in America. No one knew that in a few hours the lives of 2 airline employees who had dared to insult her would change forever. And no one knew. Naomi had been carrying an old wound, a wound that for many years she tried to keep calm to continue living. A wound called prejudice. But today, something would cause the layer of peace she had built over the years to be torn apart in just a few short minutes. This story is not about quick revenge. It is the journey of a woman who has been through so much pain, standing at the highest position of power, but still choosing to face it with composure, until someone pushed her to the limit. Naomi paused at the boarding gate and took a deep breath. Denver was breezy this morning, sweet and cold enough to make one want to think of something far away. In that moment, Naomi somehow recalled her mother Josephine standing in a grocery store in a white neighborhood. Naomi was 12. They were just buying some cans of soup, and the clerk asked her mother to open the bag because she suspected her of stealing. That look, Naomi would remember forever. Cold, contempt. An insult not only to her mother but to their very existence in a world where people believed they did not belong. Over the years, every time she encountered discrimination, Naomi reassured herself, "It's old news, I've overcome it." But there are memories, no matter how many layers of soil you try to bury them, they will still just lie below the ground waiting for a very light touch to spring up. She handed the ticket to the gate agent, smiling slightly. "Have a nice flight, thank you." Naomi's voice was warm, deep, and calm. She stepped into the first-class cabin. Soft yellow lights illuminated rows of wide, cream-colored leather seats. The space was luxurious but quiet. This was where one hoped to find relaxation after a long journey. Naomi chose a window seat because she loved watching the clouds. The floating feeling always calmed her before big speeches. Tomorrow she would stand on the podium at the United Nations and talk about educational opportunities for youth of color. It was an important speech, one that required concentration. Naomi planned to use the few hours of flight time to review her draft, to tweak a few lines to make them more touching. Everything was normal, too normal. So normal that no one could have imagined that in just a few minutes, all that calm would be blown away, replaced by a whirlwind of injustice. Have you ever been judged by someone who just glanced at you for a few seconds? Have you ever been asked a question that made you feel like you don't deserve a place even though you have every right to be there? Have you ever been spoken to in a tone that made you wonder, is it just because I look like this? If the answer is yes, you will understand the emotional journey Naomi is about to go through. If the answer is no, perhaps this story will help you see the world many people live in every day, a world where your appearance determines how people treat you. Naomi placed her backpack on her lap and unzipped it to get the manuscript. She bent down, not noticing that at the front of the cabin a pair of eyes had been glued to her since she entered. It was Lori Benson, the head flight attendant for first class. Lori was in her early 40s with neatly tied blonde hair and a neat uniform. Her posture suggested she had been in the job for a long time and was more accustomed to giving orders than listening. Lori looked at Naomi for a long moment. It wasn't a look that was helpful, nor was it a look that was welcoming. It was the look of someone trying to put someone in their right place where they thought they belonged. And in Lori's eyes, Naomi doesn't belong in first class. Naomi hadn't seen Lori yet. But there were eyes in the world that even if they weren't directed at her, you could still feel the anger in the air. A cold wind blew into the cabin as the plane doors opened for the last time to let out a few late passengers. Naomi shivered slightly. She didn't know if it was the wind or a premonition. From Lori's perspective, Naomi looked far too casual for the first-class guests she served every day. Lori was used to $30,000, Kimsley watches, designer handbags, expensive boots, and a light woody scent. But Naomi, cardigan, faded canvas backpack, old sneakers, no perfume, no diamond ring, no look of a favored acquaintance. Lori frowned. And in that moment, she came to a conclusion about Naomi, without hearing Naomi say a word. It was the first moment so small, but it was the first stone that started the whole big wave ahead. Naomi pulled the thin blanket up to her legs, gently leaning her head back on the chair. She didn't know that the way Lori looked at her was the same way the world had looked at her. Mother had looked at her as a child, had made her wonder, do I really belong here? And the biggest question of this opening is, what would a calm woman like Naomi do when faced with injustice once again, even after she has worked her whole life to overcome prejudice? The answer will start from the moment Lori walks towards her. Naomi Carter has always had a way of entering a room without making a sound, not because she wants to shrink away, but because life has forced her to learn how to make her presence felt. From a young age, the woman has understood what it means to go through life quietly but never weakly. As Naomi sat down in her first-class seat that morning, no one realized the long years, the quiet victories, and the smoldering wounds that lay behind that peaceful appearance. If one looked closely, Naomi's eyes always had a very special light, a light like someone who had stood in front of many doors that had slammed shut in their faces but still found a way to move forward. A calm light, but not resigned. She leaned her head back in her chair, staring out the window at the sky, wondering if tomorrow the speech in New York would reach the people who needed to hear it. In that draft, Naomi wanted to talk about opportunity, about how the kids in South Chicago or Baltimore or Memphis deserved the same chance to learn as all the other kids in this country. And sometimes when she talks about children, people don't know that Naomi is talking about herself. Naomi was born in a small house in South Chicago. Her mother, Josephine, worked as a night nurse. Her father, Leonard, was a power lineman. A family of honest, hard-working people, but always surrounded by the wary eyes of society. Those neighborhoods were not luxurious, not safe, but full of hearts that never stopped trying. Ever since Naomi was 6 years old, her mother had taught her, don't let other people's anger define who you are. They don't see the real you, Naomi. But that lesson only really dawned on her as she grew older, as she experienced more moments that filled her heart with questions that children shouldn't ask. Naomi remembered that when she was 10 years old, her father took her into a hardware store to buy some things for work. They had only been inside for a few seconds when the manager followed behind them, not taking his eyes off Naomi's backpack. Her father pretended not to notice, but Naomi felt his fingers gently squeeze her hand as if to say, "It's okay, son, just go on." As Naomi grew older, she began to see her mother asked for identification more often than others, even though she had never done anything wrong. And she understood there were times when people saw their parents not as people but as a kind of risk. Those fragments of memory never disappear. They just lie there waiting to be awakened. And that morning on the flight to New York, Naomi had no idea that the past would return so suddenly. But despite her dark past, Naomi still thrived. She was a good student, always at the top of her class, and when she received a full scholarship to Harvard, the whole neighborhood threw a small party saying, "Naomi is our pride." At Harvard, she experienced the most difficult years of her life not because of the schoolwork, but because of the eyes of her rich friends. Someone asked her, "How did you get here, scholarship? Lucky you." The remark hid jealousy and disdain as if she did not belong there. But with each hint, Naomi pushed harder. She studied economics, then became the youngest strategist at a major investment firm. And when she founded Carter Learning Tech, the company quickly became one of the leading online education platforms for low-income communities in the U.S. People often say Naomi made it big from nothing. But what people don't know is that along the way, there were many times when Naomi wanted to give up and return to South Chicago to live a peaceful life. What held her back was her desire to make the world kinder to children like her. Naomi often tells her employees, "Success is not about reaching the top. Success is about bringing others with you," and she lives by that. Back in first class that morning, Naomi placed the draft of her speech on a tray. The soft light illuminated the words she had written. Dignity is the first form of education. Naomi smiled faintly. It sounded philosophical, but it came from very real moments. From times when she had been looked down upon. From times when her mother had kept silent in the face of insults. From times when her father had suppressed his anger to avoid making things worse. She hopes that tomorrow's speech will help people remember that important point. Sometimes Naomi wondered, why does one have to prove that one is good enough to be treated kindly? Why can't one be treated kindly from the start? Those questions followed her throughout her adult years, and today they are still there. Not gone away. The sound of a drink cart sounded softly in the distance. Naomi glanced over and saw flight attendant Lori Benson talking to her colleague, unaware that Naomi had become the center of her attention. Naomi leaned back slightly. Her heart felt heavy, like it was about to rain. But she didn't mind. She was used to facing skeptical looks, used to having to prove herself in places where she should have been simply a passenger. It's strange. A top CEO in America, but sometimes still has the mentality of a 12-year-old child. A child still wonders, am I really accepted? The question is not a question of self-doubt. It comes from the fact that in this world, there are people who are allowed to enter a place in silence, and there are people who must enter with a critical gaze. Naomi looked out the window. She loved watching planes take off. Every time she saw one leave the ground, she thought of her own journey, starting low, then slowly rising. Little did she know that in a few minutes this peace would be broken by a sentence that she had heard too many times in her life, but never made her feel less pain. Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong cabin. That sentence would become the spark that would awaken all the old memories. And this time, Naomi would not stay silent. In that moment, Naomi felt her heart slow down. Not because she knew what was coming, but because a part of her, the part that always kept her cool, suddenly felt uneasy. Have you ever had that feeling? A day seems normal, but suddenly there is a tiny moment that makes you stop and wonder, I think something is about to happen. The feeling, though vague, still made your heart clench a little. Naomi felt it. But she inhaled slowly, as she always did when faced with something difficult. Little did she know that in just a moment, the lives of two people, Lori Benson and Captain Frank Harris, would be turned upside down, and also not knowing that she, no matter how strong, will have to face the challenge of touching the deepest layer of memory that she has tried to forget. A challenge called injustice. It was an ordinary morning in Denver, but for Naomi Carter it was one of those rare mornings when she felt light. No long meetings, no midnight work emails. Just a few hours in the sky, enough time to calm down before her big speech the next day. In the first-class cabin, the space was so quiet that one could hear the sound of pages being turned. Naomi gently placed the manuscript on the tray and leaned back in her seat. Everything around her looked peaceful. Even the yellow light from the ceiling of the cabin made one feel comfortable, as if sitting in her own private reading room. But sometimes peace is just a fragile shell before the storm comes. From the front of the cabin, Lori Benson kept an eye on Naomi. She didn't look directly at her, but her eyes kept glancing back at her through the small mirrors near the beverage preparation area. There was doubt, judgment, and something else in her gaze that was hard to name, like she was trying to fit Naomi into some frame that she believed was right. Lori has been a flight attendant for more than 17 years. She has served all kinds of people, businessmen, actors, celebrities, even heirs to large corporations, and she is proud of it. But that pride sometimes turns into a kind of silent power, making her believe she knows better who should sit where. And Naomi, with her faded canvas backpack and simple cardigan, was completely out of character for the first-class passengers Lori was used to. Naomi didn't know she was being watched, but sometimes people instinctively sensed tension even before it was apparent. She lifted her glass of water, took a small sip, and continued reading her manuscript. But a strange feeling suddenly rose within her, like the sound of wind whistling through a crack in the door, signaling that something was about to happen. The sensation made her breathe slower, not necessarily out of nervousness, but because she was used to this erratic movement, a shift as thin as a thread but enough to pull in unwanted things. Naomi wondered softly, is it just me being too sensitive? She often blamed herself for feeling wary of situations that others found normal. But as a black woman moving through a world of invisible standards, sometimes being wary is the only way to protect yourself. Lori's shoes echoed softly on the carpet. Naomi heard the footsteps approaching, but she didn't look up. She kept her composure, her eyes following the lines of the manuscript. But her heart seemed to be waiting for something. Lori stopped by Naomi's pew. She smiled, but it wasn't a welcoming smile. It was the smile of someone about to fix something they thought was wrong. "Ma'am?" Lori's voice rang out, soft but not friendly. Naomi raised her head. "Yes, I think there's a bit of a mistake here. Your seat isn't in first class. This ticket looks more like it belongs in economy." In that moment, Naomi felt as if time had slowed down. Not because the words were so unexpected, but because she had heard them, over and over again, all her life. "I think you've got the wrong cabin. Are you sure you belong here? People like you don't usually sit here." There are many versions of these statements, but the essence is the same. The person opposite is saying that she is not worthy. Naomi gently put the manuscript down. She looked at Lori, not angry, not upset, just calm enough that it was hard to tell what she was feeling. "This is my chair," she said in a deep, firm voice. "Can I see your ticket?" Lori asked again, this time with a slightly firmer voice. Naomi didn't want to argue. She took out the ticket and handed it to Lori. Lori glanced at it then, looked at it again. Then she frowned. Then she turned it over. But instead of returning the ticket and apologizing like a professional flight attendant, Lori said, "Are you sure this ticket wasn't upgraded by mistake? Because it doesn't look like the type of passenger who usually sits here." There was a long silence. The first-class atmosphere seemed to freeze. Naomi felt her heart clench a little, not because of the direct insult, but because of the memory of when she was 12 years old in the grocery store. People looked at her family, and made a decision in seconds. But Naomi is no longer the little girl she was then. "I'm sure," she replied, her eyes never leaving Lori. Her voice was so calm that Lori paused for a beat, but only for a beat. Because prejudice, once ingrained, was often stronger than reason. Lori returned the ticket but didn't leave. She crossed her arms, stood up straight, and said in a small but clear voice, "So, would you please sit still? I'll call the captain down to double-check, just to make sure everything is up to standard." Up to standard. A phrase Naomi heard so often she could predict what would come after it. In the cabin, a few passengers started to look over. An elderly man shook his head slightly, saying nothing. A woman in a luxurious suit looked at Naomi with a puzzled look, as if trying to figure out what Naomi had done wrong. Naomi felt her heart begin to clench. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. Tired of explaining, tired of proving, tired of keeping calm. The more others believe they have the right to doubt you. She took a slow breath. "If you need to call the captain, just do it. I'll wait." Lori nodded, turned, and walked away with the air of someone who was sure she was right. As soon as Lori was gone, Naomi leaned her head back in her chair and closed her eyes. In those few seconds, she heard two familiar voices echoing in her mind. One voice, soft like her mother's, said she should stay calm, that anger would only hurt her. The other, deep and strong like her father's, said she didn't need to be silent anymore. That silence was sometimes a form of complicity. Naomi opened her eyes. She didn't know what tone she would choose. But she knew one thing this time. Something was different. She didn't know why. Maybe because tomorrow she would be standing on a podium in front of the world. Maybe because she had spent her whole life facing contempt. Maybe because she was too tired to keep silent. Every pain has a limit. And sometimes that limit comes when you least expect it, just as the captain's footsteps are getting closer and closer. Lori Benson's footsteps grew louder. Each step of her shoes on the carpet seemed to disrupt the peace Naomi Carter was trying to maintain. Nearby passengers began to look up, sensing something was wrong without understanding what was happening. No one said anything, but the silence was what made the room suffocatingly tense. Lori stopped beside Naomi for the second time in as many minutes. She leaned down, tilting her head slightly as if about to make an important announcement. "Ma'am, I need to check your ticket again. Maybe the system made a mistake." Though Lori's voice was still soft, there was a clear impatience behind it. Naomi placed her hand on the page she was reading and slowly raised her head. She didn't want to make a fuss. She never liked conflict. But there are moments in life when you know it's not the ticket nor the system. It's the look in the eyes of the person across from you. Naomi handed over the ticket again. Lori took it and looked at it for a moment. Longer than necessary. Long enough for anyone looking at it to understand she wasn't checking the ticket. She was looking for confirmation of her suspicions. On the third reading, Lori said, "This ticket is correct. But are you sure it belongs to you, a gentle sentence? But like a knife blade gliding through the flesh, Naomi felt her heart constrict. Not because she was offended, but because she had heard this sentence too many times in her life. Are you sure this is the job for you? Are you sure you're qualified? Are you sure you're not in the wrong place? Those seemingly harmless questions are a whole system of doubt where people give themselves the right to judge who should stand in which position. Naomi squeezed the edge of the manuscript to calm herself. She tried to speak patiently. Yes, it's my ticket. Lori folded the ticket but did not leave. I will call the captain down to check further. It is the rules. Naomi looked straight at Lori. This is not a rule. Lori was taken aback for a moment, just a moment, but held her composure. Okay, let the captain decide. I don't want any confusion. Mistake. Naomi knew this was no mistake. This was prejudice wrapped in a thin layer of professionalism. As Lori turned away, Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Tired of rehashing conversations she thought she had left behind years ago. A passenger sitting across the seat whispered hesitantly, "Are you okay?" Naomi opened her eyes and smiled slightly. "I'm fine." But she wasn't really okay. There are things that hurt people not because they are big, but because they happen so many times that you have no strength left to face them. A minute later, Lori returned. This time she wasn't alone. She stood tall, her hands behind her back, walking as if she were leading the most powerful person on the plane, Captain Frank Harris. Harris was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered. The lines on his forehead showed that he had spent many years in the Air Force. But his eyes, from the moment he laid eyes on Naomi, didn't look like those of someone who had come to listen. It was like the gaze of someone coming to impose. "What's going on here?" Harris asked coldly, not at Naomi, but at Lori. Naomi noticed that. Lori placed her hand lightly on Harris's arm as if to report, "Captain, this passenger is not complying with cabin regulations. I have explained, but she is not cooperating." One simple sentence, but enough to turn the whole situation around. Naomi looked at Lori. Her eyes weren't angry, just disappointed. "That's not true," Naomi said. "I was just sitting in my seat." Harris turned to Naomi but didn't look at the ticket, didn't ask for information, didn't check. He just glared. "Ma'am, first class is not the place to cause trouble. I suggest you cooperate." It took Naomi a few seconds to understand what was happening. She was being treated like a troublemaker just because she dared to demand respect. She raised her chin a little, her voice low. "I am not causing trouble. Your flight attendant is discriminating against me. I have the right to sit here." The statement made Lori stiffen. Harris's frown deepened. "Discrimination, ma'am, you're exaggerating." Naomi pursed her lips. Her eyes did not tremble. But somewhere deep in her chest, old memories were awakening. At that moment, the cabin became strangely quiet. All the passengers tried to pretend to look at their phones, but their ears were wide open. No one wanted to get involved in the mess, but everyone was curious to see what would happen next. Naomi didn't want to argue, but she couldn't back down either. Not because her dignity was at stake, but because she knew that if she stayed silent, she would be accepting that someone like her didn't belong here. She kept her voice as normal as possible. "You can check my ticket. It's perfectly valid." Instead, Harris waved his hand as if to dismiss a nuisance. "I don't need to check. I trust my flight attendants. If you don't want to follow our instructions, you'll have to leave the plane." One sentence, short, strong, and cruel. Naomi felt her heart skip a beat. Lori stood next to Harris, arms crossed, eyes full of confidence like someone who had won an argument. Naomi tried to say one last time, "You can't fire me just because my appearance doesn't meet your expectations." That's when Harris lost control, something no one in the cabin could have expected. He leaned toward Naomi and slapped her hard on the cheek. The sound, a small explosion, reverberated through the luxurious first-class cabin. Everyone froze. A woman in the back seat covered her mouth. A man gasped and turned away in shock. No one believed that the captain, the man responsible for everyone's safety, had just done such a thing. Naomi raised her hand to her cheek. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Only her heart suddenly became very empty. At that moment, Naomi remembered her mother's words. "You don't always have to be strong, but be strong when you are treated unfairly." She stood up. She gathered up her manuscript. She slung her backpack over her shoulder and looked straight at Harris. Her voice was calm, each word clear. You will have to take responsibility for this." Then Naomi walked, not hurriedly, not tremblingly, like someone who knew full well that the real storm had not yet begun. For the moment Naomi Carter left first class, no one dared to say anything. All eyes were on her. A woman slapped in public, in the most luxurious cabin on the plane, humiliated with no one standing up for her. She walked slowly, not because she was weak, but because each step carried a part of the pain she had suppressed for so many years. She didn't want anyone to see her trembling. She didn't want the injustice she had just experienced to consume her. As soon as she stepped out of the plane, the noise of the airport filled her ears, mixed with the clatter of suitcases, announcements, and the murmurs of passing passengers. But Naomi walked through it all. What had happened a few minutes ago was still hot on her cheek. One side was numb. Her heart was so heavy it was hard to breathe. The feeling, not the pain of the slap, but of being trampled upon, went deeper than any physical wound. She stopped at a corner of the hallway. The mirrored wall reflected her blurry image. Naomi looked at herself, a calm woman, a successful CEO, a woman who had spent her life fighting for equal opportunity. Yet, she was still seen as someone who didn't belong there. The passengers disembarked a few minutes later. Some glanced at Naomi and then looked away as if afraid of being implicated. Some wanted to say something, but their lips only opened and closed. Fear of trouble kept them silent. Naomi understood. She had seen this silence all her life. The silence of good people, but not brave enough. And sometimes that silence hurts as much as a slap. She pulled her phone from her backpack, her hand still shaking slightly. The contact list showed a familiar name, Evelyn Moore, Director of Legal Affairs at Carter Learning Tech. Naomi's fingers paused for a moment before pressing the call button. She took a deep breath. Not because she was uncertain about what to do, but because she was gathering all her composure before entering a new battle. The call connected. "Naomi, is the flight to New York okay?" Evelyn's voice was soft and familiar, which somewhat reassured Naomi. But Naomi did not answer the question immediately. "Evelyn." Something happened. There was silence on the other end of the line for a second. "What's wrong? You don't sound right." Naomi leaned against the wooden wall near the gate. The dim light illuminated her face. She recounted everything, every word, every action of Lori Benson, Captain Frank Harris's attitude, and the slap that silenced the cabin. When Naomi reached the end, Evelyn sighed, but not in surprise. "Are you okay? Okay? At least for now." Evelyn was silent for a moment before continuing. "What do you want us to do?" It was the question Naomi knew was coming, and she had her answer the moment Harris's hand touched her cheek. "Initiate an internal investigation. Invite all first-class passengers to testify." Evelyn nodded, her voice hard. "I will do it right away." "One more thing," Naomi said. "Check the complaint history of the flight crew on their route for the last 5 years. Any sign of discrimination, no matter how small, should be documented." Evelyn replied immediately. "Understood." The call ended. Naomi's shoulders relaxed, but inside her chest was burning. Not because she was angry, but because she had just seen a door to the reform she knew the airline industry had long awaited. Naomi pulled her backpack over her shoulder and walked toward the lounge. The airport was vast, but the air around her felt suffocating. She passed laughing families, businessmen in suits busy with laptops, and young tourists taking pictures. No one knew what had just happened. No one knew that a slap had sparked a new war. A fight not just for Naomi, but for black people who have endured skeptical stares for generations. When she reached the lounge, Naomi chose a table by the glass door. The sunlight shone on the wet ground after the night's rain, reflecting on her face like a thin layer of light. She put down the manuscript, placed a cup of hot tea in front of her. Looking at the paper that said, "Dignity is the first lesson," Naomi smiled slightly, a sad smile that only those who have experienced injustice can understand. How ironic. A few minutes ago, that lesson had become more than just a line in a speech. It had become a brutal truth right on her face. A lounge attendant approached, probably hearing some of the passengers talking about what had just happened. "Ma'am, do you need assistance? You look a bit—" Naomi looked at the man. His eyes were kind, non-judgmental, a stark difference from Lori's. "I'm fine, thank you." But Naomi's voice was a little hoarse. She could feel it. A sign that her outward composure was wearing thin. The clerk nodded, not asking any more questions. That attitude made Naomi feel better. Sometimes just one person being nice to you on a bad day is enough to keep you going. Her phone buzzed. It was from Evelyn's system rolling out. Email sent to all first-class passengers. Another message followed. Also, Naomi, you might need to take a break. You don't have to do this all by yourself. Naomi stared at the words for a long time. For some reason, her eyes stung. Maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe she was so used to doing things on her own ever since she was a little girl standing next to her mother in the grocery store. She put the phone down. Then she wondered, why do things like this still happen? There are no easy answers. But Naomi knows one thing: change doesn't come from calm moments. It comes from painful moments when someone decides they can't take another day of misery. Naomi gently raised her hand to her cheek. The sting was still there, but the numbness suddenly became a strange source of energy. Not the energy of revenge, but the energy of an oath. She won't let anyone else go through this again. She looked out at the runway. A plane had just taken off, leaving a long white trail of smoke in the blue sky. Naomi took a deep breath. She was ready, not just to face Lori and Harris, but to face a system that was used to judging people. This journey will be long, it will be difficult, and it will be uncomfortable for many. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She had walked roads far more painful than this, and she knew real change always begins in the moment you are forced to face your pain. That moment happened on the flight this morning. The afternoon at Denver International Airport passed at an unusually slow pace for Naomi Carter. She sat in the lounge silently, watching the last rays of sunlight shine through the large windows. The quiet helped her steady her breathing, but inside, there were still undercurrents churning. She could hear her own heartbeat, not fast, but heavy, as if her heart was trying to contain something larger than itself. The phone vibrated. It was a text from Evelyn. 4 passengers have agreed to be witnesses. They are sending statements. Naomi placed her hand on the screen. It was a small movement, but her hand was shaking slightly. She knew this would happen, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. She opened the next message. Some passengers want to talk to you directly. They feel guilty for being quiet on the plane. Naomi closed her eyes gently. Silence. A long silence as she looked back at herself and the years that had passed. She wasn't mad at those silent people. Everyone had their own fears, but when they decided to speak up even though they were a beat late, Naomi found that more precious than any apology. An airport employee approached and said softly, "Ma'am, some people asked if they could see you." Naomi turned around. 3 people stood a few meters away, an old man with silver hair, a woman in a navy suit, and a young man in his 20s. They hesitated as if unsure whether to proceed. Naomi nodded. "Invite them in." They approached each with a different look, but all with the same expression: regret, remorse, and especially shame for having witnessed something terrible but not intervened. The first to speak was the old man with silver hair. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I saw everything." Naomi smiled slightly. "It's okay, sir. Please sit down." The old man took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "I was a high school teacher for 35 years. I taught children about respect, but today I did not do the right thing. When the captain slapped you, His voice trailed off. "I was too shocked to react." Naomi replied softly, "I understand. Moments like these sometimes leave people speechless." The woman in the suit spoke next. "Miss Carter, I want to testify. I saw the way Lori looked at you from the beginning. I know that kind of look. I saw it at the hotel where I worked, the kind of look that judges people based on their appearance." She swallowed before continuing. "What haunts me the most is that I know I should say something, but I keep quiet. I just want to make amends by standing by your side now." Naomi looked deep into the woman's eyes. "Thank you. Just speaking up can change a lot of things." Last was the young man. He was about 23, wearing a gray hoodie, his hands constantly wringing together as if he were still shaking. "Miss Carter, I was the one who recorded the video. I have turned over the original to your legal team." Naomi was a little surprised. "You're back," he nodded. "I know it was wrong to secretly film, but I felt like it was the only thing I could do in that situation. I was afraid that standing up would make things worse, but I didn't want to let them get away." A warm feeling spread through Naomi's chest. She placed her hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did a brave thing. Thank you." The 3 of them sat around Naomi for a long time, recounting every little detail of what they had witnessed. Naomi listened without interrupting, without judging. Every word they said, every look they gave made her realize that this story wasn't just hers, but the story of everyone who had witnessed injustice and wished they had done more. When they finished, Naomi leaned back in her chair. She felt a little lighter. Not because justice had come, it was far from over, but because she knew there were people who had chosen to stand on the right side, even if it was a little late. The phone rang again. It was from Evelyn. 6 more passengers have sent in reports. One said this wasn't the first time they'd seen Lori be discriminatory. Naomi read slowly, line by line. Something was unfolding. Not just her story, but the small incidents. Complaints dismissed, behavior dismissed as just a misunderstanding. A curtain was being drawn. Behind it was a system of corruption she could not have imagined. Naomi put the phone down. Her gaze grew deeper, stronger. Not angry, but determined. About 30 minutes later, a Skyreach Airlines employee appeared in the lounge. His suit was neat, but his face was clearly tense. "Ma'am, we were told you wanted to speak to a representative of the company." Naomi stood up. "I want to speak to the highest authority present at the airport." The man swallowed. "I believe the area supervisor is on his way." "Good," Naomi said. "And I hope he's competent enough to explain why an airline employee would attack a customer on a plane." The man bowed his head. Obviously, he was beginning to realize that this was not an ordinary incident. The 3 witnesses left after thanking Naomi, leaving her alone with her thoughts swirling in her head. She placed her hand on the hot cup of tea. The warmth spread to her palm, but it was not enough to dispel the cold in her heart. She remembered the moment Harris slapped her. Slow, clear, firm, not anger, power. Someone used to giving orders. Someone who believes he is right, by default. In that moment, Naomi felt her childhood, her growing up years, all the battles she thought she had overcome, to converge into a straight line running through her heart. She knew, if she kept quiet this time, there would be many others who would have to suffer the same thing. Naomi closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. Quiet. Wisdom. Then open your eyes. In those eyes now there was no longer just pain, but the steel of someone who knew what he had to do. A group of airline employees arrived. At the head of the group was a man in a black suit with a dignified appearance. Samuel Reed, the regional supervisor of Skyreach Airlines. "Miss Carter, we have been notified of the incident. On behalf of the company, I would like to." Naomi raised her hand, slightly interrupting. Not rudely, but firmly. "Before you apologize, I want you to know the full truth." Samuel straightened up. "I'm listening." Naomi looked straight into his eyes and said each sentence clearly. "Do you know that your staff slapped me in front of all the passengers?" Samuel paled. "I only heard that there was an argument." "It's not just arguing," Naomi said. "It's attacking. And it's discriminatory." Samuel swallowed. No one was prepared for this, especially when the one being slapped was someone as powerful as Naomi. Naomi continued, "I am not here to hear apologies. I am here to demand a full investigation from Skyreach Airlines." Her voice was not high, but each sound rang out as clearly as a bronze bell. Samuel bowed his head. "We will cooperate." Naomi looked at him expressionless. "I won't let this go like the others." The last sentence made Samuel stand still, not daring to say more. When they left, Naomi was alone again. She looked out at the runway. The sun was setting. A pale orange light covered the sky like a soft blanket. But in Naomi's heart, a fire was being lit. Not anger, but change. A change she knew would affect not just Lori or Harris, but the entire Skyreach system, and maybe the entire American airline industry. It was late afternoon, and the light from the giant windows of Denver International Airport was slowly turning a deep yellow, spreading to the floor like soft streaks of fire. Naomi Carter was still sitting at the table near the window, holding a cup of cold tea, her eyes fixed on the vast sky beyond the planes taking off and landing. She looked peaceful, but anyone who looked closely would notice a heavy stream of thoughts running through her eyes. A moment of silence, a sigh. Then Naomi closed her eyes. In the soft darkness behind her eyelids, she heard again clearly the sound of Captain Frank Harris's slap. Not a painful slap, but a crack, the crack of respect she had long deserved. She asked herself, why does everything keep repeating itself? And why does it have to happen today? But immediately she knew the answer. Sometimes the worst things happen when people are strongest to face them. Naomi's phone lit up with a series of notifications. Texts from Evelyn, emails from the legal team, notifications from Carter Learning Tech's internal system. She opened a message from Evelyn. First, Naomi, you need to know this. The young passenger's video has gone viral within the witness group. Many others are ready to come forward to give additional testimony. Naomi narrowed her eyes. A small wave rose in her chest. Not anxiety. A sense of alertness, like someone who knew the door was open and anything could happen. Another message came shortly after. Do you want to talk to them via video call? They are gathered in a private room in the lounge. Naomi looked up. In the distance, she saw an employee standing in front of the small conference room door, nodding towards her as if waiting for a signal. Naomi was about to make a decision, when just then her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a text message. It was a call. The screen displays the name Evelyn Moore. Naomi pressed reply. Evelyn. Evelyn's voice came from the other end, a little urgent but still clear. Naomi, there's a new development. One of the first-class passengers is a famous human rights lawyer. His name is Marcus Hale. He wants to speak to you directly. Naomi's eyes widened a little. Marcus Hale was a familiar name. He had helped victims of racial discrimination win lawsuits against large corporations. A man with a strong voice and a fearsome reputation. Where is he? Naomi asked. Conference room number 3 lounge area. He said, this is something you shouldn't fight alone. Naomi bowed her head slightly, her expression silent. She had long since grown accustomed to standing alone. And yet today, people were coming to stand with her. Naomi stood up, grabbed her backpack, and walked toward the conference room. Her steps were slow but steady, like someone walking through a door leading to a journey larger than herself. She opened the door. There were 7 people inside, passengers who had witnessed the incident. The old teacher, the woman in the navy suit, the young man filming the video, 2 middle-aged men and an older couple. And in the middle of the table, a black man in his 50s stood up to greet her, Marcus Hale. He has a kind face but sharp eyes, like someone who has seen too much injustice to be afraid of it. Miss Carter, he said in a deep voice. It's a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it weren't so. Naomi walked in, nodding slightly. I thank you for your time. Marcus invited her to sit. There was silence in the room for a moment, as if everyone was waiting for Naomi to calm down before starting. Marcus placed his hands on the table, clasping them together. We reviewed the video. What happened was not just a misunderstanding. It was a clear, discriminatory attack. Naomi was silent, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and heaviness. Marcus continued, the important thing is, you are not alone, and you should not be silent. A simple word, but to Naomi it was like a warm stream flowing into her cold chest. Naomi clasped her hands together. I don't intend to stay silent, but I also don't want this to turn into an uncontrolled media storm. Marcus nodded. I understand. Real change doesn't come from scandal, it comes from responsibility, and we, the people who have witnessed it, are willing to do our part. She looked around the room. Each of them, regular people, no fame, no special power, looked at her with the eyes of people who wanted to do what was right, not because she was a CEO, not because she had power, but because they saw something wrong and wanted to fix it. Naomi felt her nose sting. She took a deep breath to steady her voice. Thank you all. Really, thank you. The woman in the suit smiled slightly. You don't need to thank us. We owe you an apology for being silent for so long. The words made the room feel warmer, like a piece of ice melting, revealing warm water underneath. Marcus turned on his laptop and turned the screen towards Naomi. Here are copies of the video and statements from everyone in the room. I have compiled a rough summary. If you want, I can handle the legal part with your team. Naomi looked at him. You want to get in on this? Marcus smiled. No, I want to be part of your journey. Because if not you, someone with a voice, someone with influence who will force systems like this to change. Naomi listened to every word, and her heart, already wounded from the slap that morning, suddenly beat faster. For the first time that day, she felt less alone on the long road ahead. After a while, the meeting ended. Everyone left the room one by one, but they all told Naomi the same thing. We will testify. As the door closed, Naomi stood still in the quiet room. The yellow light reflected off the conference table, giving it a warm, candle-like feel. She turned and walked to the window. Outside, it was getting dark. Planes were streaking across the purple sky like charcoal shadows. In that moment, Naomi heard her mother's voice in her memory. Daughter, stand strong. And teach others to stand strong too. The tone brought a sting to Naomi's eyes, but this time the tears weren't from pain. They were from the realization that this journey wasn't just hers anymore. There are ordinary people on her side. There are witnesses who are telling the truth. There is a lawyer who is willing to fight with her, and there is a system that is about to be shaken. Naomi whispered softly as if talking to herself, "Okay, let's begin." A short sentence. But in her chest was a growing source of strength. As Naomi left the conference room and stepped back into the hallway, the cold air from the air conditioning hit her face. The burning sensation on her left cheek the mark Harris had left was still there. But now it was more than just a pain. It was a sign, a reminder, that she had chosen the right path, even a challenging one. And she will go all the way. Denver began to darken. Airport lights replaced the sunlight, casting a cold, peaceful glow. In the quiet lounge, Naomi Carter walked slowly down the long hallway. Each step carried the thought of a long day, a day that was both painful and revealing, something else, the truth, beginning to emerge. She passed the small cafe. The smell of freshly brewed espresso wafted through the air. Normally, Naomi would have stopped and bought a warm cappuccino to ease her mind. But today, she didn't think about that. Her mind was preoccupied with something else. Something much bigger than Harris's slap. That is, this system has been wrong for a long time, and for the first time there is a chance to fix it. Naomi continued walking into the private lounge that airport staff had reserved for her to rest in while waiting for the legal team to submit their first report. The room was small, warmly lit with dark wooden walls. It was so quiet Naomi could hear her own light breathing. She sat down, put her backpack beside her, and opened her laptop. Immediately, a series of emails appeared. Evelyn's first report, witness information, detailed accounts, and, most notably, internal Skyreach Airlines records that Evelyn had begun accessing with the legal rights they possessed. Naomi gripped the edge of the table. This was no longer a personal battle. This was the beginning of a full-scale excavation where long-hidden things would come to light. She opened the first report. On page 1, Evelyn boldly typed, "There were signs of repeated discriminatory behavior by Lori Benson on several previous flights." Naomi raised an eyebrow. She continued reading. Passenger A last year complained that Lori told them, "This compartment is not for people like you." Passenger B 3 months ago noted that Lori let a white passenger board first, even though they arrived after a black passenger. Passenger C last week reported that Lori was disrespectful and unwarrantedly suspicious. Naomi paused for a moment. She closed her eyes. Part of her felt pain not for herself but for those who suffered but had no voice. She continued reading. On the very next page, she saw the words, "Captain Frank Harris, 2 complaints." 2 complaints were filed against Harris. Both were resolved internally and not documented, and that is the problem. It's not that the system didn't see. It's that the system saw, but chose to close its eyes. Naomi put her hand to her forehead. She remembered what Marcus had said earlier. There can be no real change if the system isn't held accountable. She knew that better than anyone. When the system goes silent, evil never gets smaller. It only lurks deeper until someone gets hurt badly enough to force people to look again. The phone rang softly. It was a video call from Evelyn. Naomi pressed reply. Evelyn's face lit up the steely expression of a lawyer in strict work mode. "Naomi, have you watched it all?" "Okay. Lori and Harris. Not the first case. Not only that," Evelyn said. "I found an internal email chain. Many flight attendants complained that Lori was disrespectful and created a stressful environment, but her manager just ignored it." "Forget it," Naomi asked again. Her voice was soft but trembling with suppressed anger. "Yes. The most common answer they gave was, it was just a misunderstanding between the customer and the staff." Naomi smiled slightly. A sarcastic smile. Not at Evelyn, but at the way the system tried to cover up its own errors. Evelyn continued. "I have one more thing. A former Skyreach flight attendant sent an unsolicited email. She said they warned management about Lori's behavior 3 years ago. And then, the manager told her, don't make things complicated." Naomi looked down at the table. Her fingers tapped lightly as if marking a deeper thought. Lori isn't the only problem. Harris is too. But deep down, it's this culture of silence that's the scariest thing. Naomi looked up. "Evelyn, we won't just deal with those 2. We'll deal with the system that allows them to exist. Evelyn nodded vigorously. I understand. The call ended. Naomi closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The sky outside had turned a deep purple. The yellow lights of the airport twinkled like thousands of dots of light. She remembered the moment Harris slapped her. It hurt then. But what hurt more now was knowing that so many people had gone through the same thing or worse, and no one listened. Naomi put her hand to her chest. A deep breath. Silence. Then her eyes opened with the look of one who would no longer back down. She stood up. She walked to the door. She opened it. Outside, noises poured in, the sound of suitcases being dragged, children laughing, loudspeaker announcements. The world is going on as usual. But Naomi is not, and Skyreach Airlines is not going to be the same. When Naomi returned to the main lounge, she found Marcus Hale standing talking with several other witnesses. When he saw Naomi, he walked over. I was just contacted by Skyreach, Marcus said. They want to meet you privately to reconcile before things get out of hand. Naomi curled her lips. So fast. They're scared, Marcus said. But don't accept. They want to shut you up. Naomi crossed her arms and tilted her head in thought. I don't intend to let them repeat this to someone else. Marcus smiled. I know, and that's why they're scared. That sentence was like a small flame lighting up Naomi's eyes. Late at night, Naomi stepped out of the lounge. The airport was less crowded. The loudspeaker announcements were fading. She stood in front of the glass door and saw her reflection. A calm woman. A successful CEO. A woman with a massive restructuring on her shoulders. Suddenly, Naomi heard her mother's voice echoing from her distant memories. Daughter, pain is not to make you fall. Pain is to let you know you can stand up stronger. Naomi closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. Then she whispered, I'm up, Mom. In the sky, a plane took off, its lights flashing through the night. Naomi watched, and she knew. Her journey of truth, of justice, of change had just begun. The evening at Denver International Airport had grown quieter. The last of the late passengers were making their way through security, the soft click of suitcases on the polished stone floor. Naomi Carter emerged from the lounge holding a folder of notes from the meeting with Marcus and the witnesses. She stood in the middle of the long hallway, taking in the eerie silence. Even though the airport was crowded, she felt a very special space opening up inside her. A space filled with thoughts, but not as heavy as before. The yellow light reflected off Naomi's silky black hair, creating a soft halo around her, as if the place she stood was completely isolated from the world around her. A familiar voice rang out from behind Naomi. Naomi turned. It was Marcus Hale. He approached, slow and steady, the way men approach a battle they have prepared for. I know it's late, Marcus said, but we need to start planning. What will happen tomorrow? And what they don't expect. Naomi looked at him, smiling slightly. I guess you've thought of that. Marcus nodded. The first step is transparency. The second step is forcing them to face what they have let sink in for so long. Naomi walked beside him, the two of them walking slowly through the empty hallway. It felt like stepping through a buffer zone of calm before stepping straight into the eye of a storm. The two of them sat down on a bench near the large glass windows. Outside, the planes lay motionless like giant whales resting under the yellow light. Marcus opened a file and spread it out on the table. Here is my preliminary analysis. Take a look. Naomi bent down. On the page, lines were marked in yellow highlighter: witness testimony, times of events, descriptions of each person. In the middle is a large sentence, Marcus underlined. Naomi Carter was attacked while being completely cooperative and not causing trouble. A truth as clear as day. But the old Skyreach system tried to paint it with the color of misunderstanding. Naomi touched the words lightly as if touching her own pain, a pain that had been eased too many times in her life. Marcus continued, Not only that, I compared each person's statements. They all agreed Lori Benson was the one who actively attacked you, and Frank Harris used violence just to prove his power. Naomi said nothing. Her eyes followed the small notes Marcus placed below loose systems. Lack of consistent training, ignoring complaints from staff and passengers. She read each word, and it felt like it wasn't just the two people who had slapped her today, but an entire system that had slapped countless people like her before. Naomi sat up straight. Her voice was calm. We will reform, but we have to do it the right way. Marcus smiled as if he had been waiting for that. And what is the right way? Naomi looked toward the glass door, where the strip lights were illuminating the runway. After a few seconds of thinking, she said, "No noise, no press, no scandal. We do it from the inside, step by step, quiet but strong." Marcus nodded. "I knew you would say that. And it's true, it's the only way to make real change." Naomi smiled softly. "You understand me." "No, I understand people like you," Marcus said. "People who have experienced discrimination long enough to know that screaming is a way to release anger, but it doesn't fix the problem." The statement made Naomi sink for a few seconds, not out of sadness, but because he had spoken to the dark heart of her entire life. Naomi's laptop beeped softly. New email. She opened it. Internal notice, Skyreach Airlines meeting requested. Senior management subject incident involving first-class passenger Naomi Carter. Naomi frowned. Marcus looked at the screen and tilted his head. "They want an urgent meeting." "Tonight?" Naomi asked. "No, tomorrow morning, and at Skyreach headquarters in Denver." Naomi let out a small sigh. A slow but deep breath. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." Marcus smiled as if he had been expecting it. "They will try to shut everything down, but you won't let them. Will you?" Naomi looked at him. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not afraid, but the look of someone who had chosen a path and would see it through to the end. "No," Naomi replied. "I will open everything." A gentle breeze from the air conditioning system blew by, causing the paper on the table to shake slightly. Naomi reached out to hold it. The action was small, but it reminded her of what her mother had said. "You don't always have to be the storm. Sometimes you just have to stand firm." Naomi slowly closed her eyes. In that quiet moment, the pain from the slap that morning suddenly felt more distant. It didn't go away, but it no longer filled her heart. She stood strong. And tomorrow, she would walk again. Marcus stood up first. "Naomi, I'll go. Prepare the documents. We'll meet again early in the morning." Naomi stood up and followed. "Thank you, Marcus. Not for this, but for standing by me." Marcus put his hand on his chest and bowed his head. "I'm not on your side just because you're the CEO. I'm on your side because you're right." Naomi nodded, and they parted in the quiet yellow light of the airport. As Naomi walked on alone, she stopped at the end of the hallway where a large mirror reflected her entire figure. A black woman, strong, calm, and carrying the weight of a culture that needs to change. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "Tomorrow, we start rewriting the way they treat us." Then she turned away, dragging her small suitcase. Step by step, she walked towards the elevator leading down to the shuttle area. Every step is a promise, silent but steady, like the heartbeat of a woman who no longer runs away from pain, but is turning it into a guiding light. The morning in Denver was colder than usual. The sky was a light gray, and a thin layer of fog hung over the glass-clad skyscrapers, making it look like a day of big change. Naomi Carter stood in front of Skyreach Airlines headquarters, a modern building with blue glass stretching from top to bottom. The letters Skyreach headquarters reflected the pale morning light. She took a deep breath, not to gather courage, but to steady her heart that was becoming very quiet. She didn't come here to get angry. She came to put the truth on the table. Marcus Hale stepped out of the car behind her. He wore a long, charcoal gray coat and carried a leather briefcase, his expression calm but stern like a lawyer heading into battle. "Ready, Naomi?" Naomi nodded slightly. "I was ready from the moment Mr. Harris raised his hand." Marcus smiled, a knowing smile, but not too big. He knew it wasn't pride, it was the truth. Stepping into the main lobby, Naomi noticed faces staring back at her. Some employees recognized her CEO, Carter Learning Tech, one of Skyreach Corporate Flyer's biggest clients. But today they recognized her for a different reason. Because of the video. Because of the attack. Because the rumor spread within the company faster than the press. Naomi ignored their gazes. She walked straight to the reception desk. "I'm Naomi Carter. I have a meeting with the board." The receptionist was startled for a moment, then immediately stood up straight, her voice solemn. "Yes, Miss Carter. They are waiting on the 21st floor. I will take you up." The elevator doors opened. Naomi stepped in. Marcus followed. As the elevator door closed, a silence fell over the two of them. In that silence, Naomi looked straight into the mirror in front of her. Reflection. A black woman wearing a dark coat, her eyes as calm as water but deep and strong as the tide. She asked herself softly in her mind, Am I scared? And immediately, a gentle answer appeared in her heart. No, I'm just waiting. The 21st floor opened into a spacious, luxurious space. Long conference tables. Glass walls opened up to views of the city below. And in the center of the room was the Skyreach Airlines Board of Directors, 7 men and women all dressed in business suits. At the head of the table, the company's CEO, Richard Coleman, stood up as Naomi entered. He was a white man, about 50, with a stern face but a strained look in his eyes today. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. Naomi nodded. Marcus stepped forward as well, shaking hands politely with each of them, but his expression left no room for doubt that he could be persuaded. Naomi sat down. She didn't lean back. She didn't look tired. She kept her back straight as if the whole room was watching her learn to face the truth. Richard began. Before I begin, I would like to extend my deepest apologies on behalf of the entire company for what happened on yesterday's flight. The actions of Captain Harris and flight attendant Benson do not reflect the standards of Skyreach at all. Naomi looked at him, her eyes calm. Doesn't reflect the standard, or does it reflect a long-standing problem that you don't want to see? The whole conference room fell silent. The question, soft but sharp, felt like a small knife placed in the middle of the wooden table. Richard paused slightly, but he tried to keep his voice professional. Miss Carter, we understand you're angry. Naomi interrupted, but very softly. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. The last 3 words fell, making the air seem thick. Marcus opened his briefcase, took out a stack of documents and slammed them down on the table just enough so that the sound startled a few people. Here are all the witness statements. Here are the videos. Here are the previous complaints. And here is the evidence that the internal management system ignored the warnings about Lori Benson and Harris. A female manager frowned, trying to keep her composure. Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, but where did you get that internal data? Marcus smiled half-heartedly. From your former employee, the one who warned but was ignored. Like so many others, no one answered. No one could refute. Naomi clasped her hands on the table. She didn't need to say anything harsh. The truth was heavy enough. After a few seconds of silence, Richard sighed. The sigh of a man who knew the meeting was not going in the direction he wanted. Miss Carter, he said, Skyreach would like to resolve this matter peacefully. We suggest Naomi raised her hand slightly. I know what you want to propose. A compensation, an apology, a short-term commitment. She shook her head. No. I didn't come here to get money. One of the vice presidents frowned unconsciously. Naomi continued. I came here because I wanted to know, does Skyreach really want to change, or just want to maintain its image? The second question was like a thunderclap in the conference room. The people at the next table started looking at each other, not as confident as before. Richard sat up straight, his voice deeper. What do you want us to do? Naomi placed her hand on Marcus's file. Her voice was no longer soft. It was sharp, but still calm. I want one. Harris and Benson are suspended pending a full investigation. 2. Reopen all previously ignored complaints. 3. Create a new mandatory training program for all employees. 4. Establish a transparent monitoring system with third-party participation. 5. And, I want to be directly involved in Skyreach's Customer Culture Transformation Council. The entire conference room gasped slightly, not loudly, but clearly not expecting the 5th request. Naomi looked at each person one by one, her eyes unwavering. I don't just want to change the behavior of these 2 people. I want to change the culture that allows them to do that. Richard sat still. No resistance, no displeasure. He just looked at Naomi, as if he were completely reassessing the woman before him. After nearly half a minute of silence, he said, Miss Carter, I must admit no one has ever spoken so directly to Skyreach. Naomi replied. Maybe because they don't have the power to speak. But I do, and I will use it properly. A small, very small smile appeared on Richard's lips. Not a happy smile, but a smile of recognition that he was facing the inevitable. He turned to the council. Let's vote. Now. 10 minutes later. The results were on the table. All voted in favor. Richard turned back, placing his hands on the table. Miss Carter, Skyreach accepts all of your offers. Naomi was as calm as when she entered. No cheers, no relief. She just nodded slightly. Good, then let's begin. In that moment, the moment everyone in the conference room, from the leaders to the lawyers, looked at Naomi with different eyes. The sky outside suddenly revealed a thin ray of sunlight through the thick clouds. as a sign. A system has just opened its eyes. And a journey of reform has officially begun, not with a shout, but with the steadfast calm of a woman who knows what she needs to do. That afternoon, the 14th floor of Skyreach Airlines was filled with a strange atmosphere. There was less movement of staff. Whispers were heard in every corner of the hallway. Rumors of a meeting between Naomi Carter and the board of directors spread like wind across a dry field. No one knows exactly what happened in that conference room, but everyone felt it something big had just shaken the entire system, and the people who saw it most clearly were the two who were most afraid: Lori Benson, Frank Harris. In the crew break room, Lori Benson sat hunched over on a pale gray couch, her hands clenched, her knuckles white. She knew, and not only knew, but she could feel it slipping away. She tried to remain calm, but her face showed an unprecedented confusion. A few of her colleagues who passed by gave her strange looks, no longer friendly, but rather wary. The light in the break room was a warm yellow, but Lori felt cold. Cold from within. A cold that felt a lot like fear. They won't make a big deal out of this, she told herself, but her voice was shaking. I was just following procedure. I was just keeping order. But she no longer believed that statement. Not when a series of internal emails were being leaked. Not when a witness had spoken. And especially, not when the person she had insulted was Naomi Carter, the person the entire company was now talking about as a storm disguised as calm. The door to the break room opened. A young flight attendant walked in, looked at Lori, and then instinctively ducked her head to the side. Lori swallowed. She had never felt so avoided. On the 12th floor in the pilot's quarters, Frank Harris stood before the large mirror by the sink. His coat hung loosely on a hook, his tie untied, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Harris looked in the mirror for a long time. A very long time. The mirror reflects a man who was once confident in his power, a man who thought that if he just spoke loudly enough, sternly enough, everything would fall into place. But today, facing the mirror, he did not see authority. He only saw something collapsing inside himself. He lowered his hand to the sink, the water running cold against his skin. The cold sensation sobered him, not sober to fight, but sober to remember what he did. The slap, Naomi's face, the silence from the passengers, and the way he thought he had the right to do it. Harris leaned against the sink. A heavy breath escaped his chest. The door behind him opened slightly. A young pilot stood there, not daring to enter. "Captain, they called you down to the 21st floor. The management wants to see you." Tim Harris paused for a moment. The young pilot swallowed. "I'm sorry to say, but it seems serious." Harris didn't answer, but his eyes darkened no longer with arrogance, but with a truth that forced him to look straight. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the building, Naomi Carter was walking down the stairs to the VIP cafeteria. The tense meeting had just ended, but she didn't feel tired. Not because it had been easy, but because she knew this was just the beginning. Marcus Hale walked beside him. He opened the thin file, read a few lines, and said, "Do you know how they will react when they hear that you two are suspended?" Naomi replied softly. "They will be confused, afraid, resisting, maybe angry." She paused, looking down at a patch of polished stone floor. But sometimes, people have to face the truth about themselves to have a chance to change. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You don't just want to punish them, right?" Naomi smiled slightly. "No. I want them to see the people they have become, and have the chance to become better people." Marcus was a little surprised by the tone. He knew Naomi was strong, but he hadn't expected her to be this compassionate, not after what Harris and Lori had done. About an hour later, both Harris and Lori were called into the internal staff meeting room. They weren't together, but the tension seemed to be mixed in the thick air. Lori arrived first. She sat on a metal chair against the wall, her hands clasped together, shaking slightly. Harris came later. His boots were loud and steady, but his steps lacked confidence. They both saw each other and immediately looked away. No one said a word. No one dared. The air was heavy enough to make it difficult for anyone to breathe. The door to the conference room opened. A senior executive appeared. His face was calm, but it was the calm of someone about to make a serious announcement. "Please come in." Harris and Lori walked in and sat down on opposite sides of the large wooden table. The manager stood up straight and placed a stack of documents on the table. He spoke slowly, each word like a small stone falling into a lake. Following a meeting this morning with the board of directors and legal representatives, Skyreach Airlines has decided to suspend both individuals. Effective immediately. Lori was shocked. Harris sat stiffly. Management continues. Both will have to participate in a comprehensive internal investigation. The final result will decide whether to keep or terminate the contract. He opened the document and handed it to them. Responses: unprofessional conduct, discrimination, and for Harris, battery on a passenger. Lori's voice broke. I didn't mean to. The manager raised his hand and interrupted Miss Benson. It was all recorded. There is video. There are witnesses. Lori clenched her hands until they were red. A tear fell onto the table, not because she was wronged, but because she was facing real consequences for the first time in her life. Harris remained silent. But his face no longer had the coldness. Instead, it looked weary, as if he had just seen a part of himself he had tried to avoid. The manager said the last sentence, and one more thing. The Reform Council will have the direct participation of Naomi Carter. That sentence made both of them slip out of the familiar feeling. Lori looked up, her eyes twitching slightly. Harris clenched his jaw. Naomi Carter, the one they despised, the one they insulted, now the one who would lead change and determine their future. That's what really makes them tremble. When the meeting ended, Harris walked out into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. For the first time in his many years as a pilot, he felt like he had no control. Lori stepped back, hugging the documents, her face in her hands. We're going to lose everything, aren't we? She whispered, her voice breaking. Harris looked at her. It was no longer the gaze of a captain yelling at his subordinates, but the gaze of a man falling into the abyss with the others. I don't know, he said honestly. But maybe it's worth thinking about what we've done, Lori sobbed. Harris turned away. Not because he was cold, but because he didn't know how to deal with the shame rising in his chest. Meanwhile, on the 21st floor, Naomi looked out the window. Denver had its last streaks of golden sunlight peeking through the clouds this afternoon. It seemed like a small sign that despite the storm, the sun had still found a way to show up. Marcus entered, holding a document from the council. Naomi, they approved all your requests. The suspension is effective. Naomi didn't smile. She just nodded. Then gently said, Good. Then we continue. Her voice was not happy, not vengeful, just calm and determined, as if everything that happened today was just a necessary step towards a larger goal, a kinder system, a fairer culture, a more listening society. As she stood up, the last golden sunlight reflected on her face, and Marcus realized, it's not Skyreach that's transforming Naomi, it's Naomi that's transforming Skyreach. The Denver sky was unusually clear the next morning. The soft sunlight draped the towering glass buildings like a thin veil, reflecting a soft yellow hue that felt peaceful to look at. But inside Skyreach Airlines, that peace didn't come from the outside. It was being seeded by the changes that were beginning to take shape. And at the center of that change is Naomi Carter. That morning, Naomi walked into the Skyreach building with a lighter step than the day before. Not because everything was okay, but because she knew today was not a day of justice but of hope. Marcus Hale was waiting for her in the lobby. He was dressed in a neat charcoal suit, holding a briefcase, his expression sharp but calm. Today is the first internal training session, Marcus said. Would you like to say a few words? Naomi looked at him, tilting her head slightly. Do they want to hear? Marcus replied with a slight smile. Maybe not all, but you said that they would have to listen. Naomi didn't reply. She just nodded slightly and walked towards the elevator. The large conference room on the 18th floor was brightly lit. Over 100 Skyreach employees were present, flight attendants, ground staff, middle managers, training department. Everyone was silent, their postures slightly stiff when Naomi entered. Not because of fear, not because of pride, but because they were standing before a woman, with the reason to change everything in just a few days. Naomi stood on the small stage, microphone in hand. She did not speak immediately. First, she looked around the room, at every face, at the expectant eyes, at the shy ones, and at the defensive ones. Then she said in a voice as soft as a breath, I didn't come here to talk about what happened. The whole room's hearts moved slightly. Naomi continued, I came to remind you that it happened because we kept too many things silent. A few employees raised their heads. Those words not blaming but sincere enough to touch the deepest part of everyone's heart. Naomi took a step down, no longer standing above them. She wanted to stand with them. Someone asked me, "Why didn't you sue the company right away? Why didn't you make a big deal out of it?" I replied, "Because I don't want to destroy anyone. I want to help us rebuild what has been forgotten." She placed her hand on her chest. "Respect. Respect." The atmosphere calmed down. A young flight attendant in the front row swallowed slightly, her eyes slightly moist. Naomi continued, "I was once the overlooked passenger. I was once the black woman who was suspected because of her modest clothing. I was once the person who was judged by the color of my skin before I was even asked my name." The room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to be turned down. And I know, I'm not the only one who has experienced that. There are also employees here who are looked down upon by their superiors. There are people who are insulted by customers. There are people who try their best, but no one recognizes them. A few people bowed their heads, their lips pressed together. The silent wounds of the workplace were suddenly called out. Naomi smiled slightly. "So I didn't come to blame anyone. I came to start over." She turned to the large screen behind her. The slide showed the text, "Rebuild trust. Rebuild culture. Rebuild Skyreach." Naomi said slowly, "I want us to rebuild a culture where everyone is seen with dignity, not prejudice. I want every employee to understand that their small words can make a customer feel respected or feel hurt." Then, she put the microphone down on the table. Not because she had run out of things to say, but to say the most important sentence in her own natural voice. "And I believe we can do it." The room exhaled at once, as if everyone had just let go of something heavy. A small round of applause broke out, not loud but genuine, enough to let Naomi know they were listening and open. The training session lasted 3 hours. Naomi didn't say much. She just observed and listened to the staff share. An older flight attendant described a passenger who insulted her because of her Caribbean accent. A younger employee described being yelled at by a passenger for being late for a boarding that was not her fault. A manager shared the pressure to ignore complaints to maintain good ratings. Naomi listened to each story as if it were a piece of a system. Each piece had its flaws, but none were worthless. And then the most surprising thing happened. As the session was ending, the door to the room opened slightly. Lori Benson stood there. Her eyes were red, her hands holding a stack of papers. Everyone turned, not in hatred, but in curiosity and confusion. Naomi looked at her. His eyes were non-judgmental, just calm. Lori walked in slowly. She didn't sit down. She stood at the back of the room looking at Naomi, then at everyone else. Lori's voice was shaky but clear. "I'd like to say something." No one stopped her. The room was silent. Lori swallowed. "I was wrong. I treated the passengers with suspicion instead of respect." A choked breath. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was keeping the rules. But actually, I was just keeping my prejudices." She bowed her head, "And I apologize. Not just Naomi, but everyone here for being part of the problem." There was a slight stir in the room. Many people looked at Naomi, waiting for her reaction. Naomi stood up and walked toward Lori. No one knew what she would say. She stopped in front of Lori, close enough that they could feel each other's breath. Naomi said softly, "Thank you for being brave." One short sentence, but it made Lori cry. Not because of shame, but because, for the first time in years, someone looked at her as a person who could change. As everyone left the room, Marcus walked over and stood next to Naomi. "I don't think Lori will come." Naomi watched Lori's figure walk away, her face calm. Sometimes people who do wrong also want to listen to guidance, as long as they are given the chance. Marcus nodded slowly. He had met many people who fought for justice, but none like Naomi. She wasn't strong just because she was right. She was strong because she knew how to make others want to do what was right, too. Late in the afternoon, Naomi stepped outside the Skyreach building. A light breeze blew through her hair, carrying the smell of fresh grass and the sound of distant cars. She looked up at the sky. Blue returned after a long morning. She smiled slightly. Not because of victory, but because today, for the first time, she saw real change coming from within. Not from rules, not from punishment, not from pressure, but from the truth being spoken. And from people listening to each other. Naomi whispered to herself, This is just the beginning. And she knew tomorrow would be a long day, but her heart was no longer heavy. Because she felt it, the healing had begun. Denver's weekend mornings are surprisingly clear. The sky is a clean blue and soft rays of sunlight filter through the glass buildings, illuminating the city in a peaceful stillness. Naomi Carter stood before the large glass doors of the Skyreach Airlines 21st floor conference room. She looked down at the cityscape below, the steady flow of cars, the tiny people like the steady breathing of a living city. Today is special, not because there is an important meeting, not because there is a legal decision, but because today is the first day of a new Skyreach. The first day of the reform program was officially launched with the presence of the entire board of directors, employees at all levels, and dozens of important customer representatives. The day Naomi, who had been slapped and humiliated in first class, returned not as a victim, but as a guide. Behind her, the conference room door opened. Marcus Hale entered a thick document in his hand. "They are ready," he said softly. Naomi turned back slightly, giving a peaceful smile. "Me too." The two of them walked into the large conference room where the Skyreach leadership was waiting. The atmosphere today was not as tense as the first meeting. It was more formal and quieter. It was as if everyone knew they were entering a phase that would be remembered for a long time in the company's internal history. Richard Coleman, CEO of Skyreach, stood up and nodded at Naomi. There was something different in his eyes. No longer defensive, no longer self-conscious, but genuine respect. "Miss Carter," he began today, "Skyreach officially launches the largest cultural transformation program in its 23 years. We would like to invite you to say a few words as the person who sparked this change." Naomi nodded slightly. She stepped forward. She chose not to stand on a high platform, but rather to stand on equal footing with everyone else. She didn't hold the microphone. She wanted her voice to come out as naturally as possible. Naomi looked around the large room. At the waiting faces, she said slowly, "I used to think that slap on that flight was the most painful thing I had ever received." Many people lowered their eyes. She continued, "But what hurts more is knowing that so many others have suffered the same things silently alone, and no one stood up for them." The whole room was silent, as if holding its breath. "If I had chosen anger, I would not be standing here today. If I had chosen revenge, perhaps everything would have been noisy, chaotic, and then forgotten." Naomi placed her hand on her chest. "But I want more than revenge. I want change." A small light from the glass window reflected on her face, making her calm expression even more obvious. "We can't erase the past, but we can choose how to move forward. And today, I choose to move forward with you." A deep breath filled the room. Someone nodded slightly. A few wiped their eyes. Naomi smiled, a gentle smile, not arrogant, not cruel. "I believe Skyreach can become the airline that every customer wants to board, not because of the luxury cabin, but because of respect." She stepped back a little, giving way to the silence. The meeting went smoothly. The reform programs were clearly presented. Time's transparent monitoring system. Asterisk. Independent complaints. Handling unit. Asterisk. Mandatory cultural diversity training. Asterisk. New personnel assessment process. Asterisk. And the Reform Council has Naomi as a direct consultant. Every step bears Naomi's mark. When the meeting ended, everyone stood up and shook hands. The atmosphere was different from the tense days before. Not cheerful, but hopeful. While Naomi was packing up the documents, the door to the room opened. Lori Benson walked in looking worried and determined. Everyone in the room paused. Lori approached Naomi, stopping a few feet away. "Miss Carter," her voice trembled. "I want to thank you." Naomi looked at Lori for a few seconds longer. No guessing, no judging, just looking as if they were meeting for the first time without preconceptions between them. Lori continued, "Thank you for not pushing me out of this life. And thank you for giving me a chance to become a better person." Her eyes reddened. She bowed her head deeply. Naomi replied gently, "Opportunity is something we all need, Lori. What matters is how we use it." Lori cried, not from fear this time, but from relief. As Naomi and Marcus stepped out of Skyreach headquarters, the wind was gentle. The sky was incredibly blue today. Naomi stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. Cool air rushed through her chest. Marcus smiled. "You know, I thought your goal was to fix the injustice on the flight." Naomi shook her head slightly. "No, Marcus. She looked further into the sky where a Skyreach plane was taking off. My goal is to change the way the world treats people like me. And if Skyreach is different today, then tomorrow other places can be different too. Marcus looked at her for a long time, then nodded. I believe you can do it. Naomi smiled, soft but powerful. The smile of a woman who knew the journey ahead was long difficult, but also knew she was no longer alone. On the way back, Naomi received a text message from her mother. A short sentence, but it made her heart sink with love. Daughter, I am proud of you. You chose the light. Naomi leaned her head against the car window. The city passed by like a slow film. Today, she felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she had done the right thing and seen other hearts open in response. That afternoon, Naomi sat down to write in her diary. The blank pages were slowly filled with soft, slow lines. Change doesn't come from who slaps who. Change comes from how we stand up after that slap. She put down her pen, looked out the window, and saw the Denver sky dyed gold by the sunset. A gentle yellow color like a blessing. Asterisk. This is no longer a story about a slap. It is no longer a story about discrimination or about power abused. This has become the story of second chances, change, and how one strong yet calm woman can make an entire system look at itself. Naomi Carter knows the journey isn't over, but today, she took a step big enough for history to remember. And tomorrow, when she boards another flight, she will know she is not the only one who will be treated with respect. Many others who do not have as strong a voice as she does will be protected by today's changes. She smiled and whispered, We have begun, and we will continue. The sky was getting dark, but the light Naomi lit was still there, spreading out in long, never-ending waves. If you find this story gives you emotions, new perspectives, or a little hope for this world, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue to accompany other humane and inspirational stories. Thanks for listening. See you in the next story.